The champagne tower began to collapse, just as Isabella Hayes saw Adrian Castellano watching her from across the ballroom. One crystal coupe slipped, struck another, and sent a sharp chime through the unfinished reception hall. 40 glasses trembled beneath the white glow of suspended chandeliers. Workers froze with ribbons in their hands. The air smelled of cut roses, furniture polish, and the faint metallic bite of panic. Isabella moved before anyone else did. She kicked off her heels, caught the tilting silver tray with one hand, and pressed her shoulder against the linen-covered table. "Clear the left side," she ordered. Slowly. "Nobody touches the top row." 2 servers obeyed without thinking. Within seconds, the tower steadied. Not one glass shattered. The room exhaled. Adrian did not. He stood beside the carved mahogany doors in a charcoal suit, motionless while his security detail waited several feet behind him. His gaze followed Isabella as she slid her shoes back on and checked the table legs. "The floor slopes half an inch toward the terrace," she said to the hotel manager. "Move the display 6 feet east, or it will happen again during the reception." "Ms. Hayes," the manager whispered, glancing toward Adrian. "Mr. Castellano requested the tower there." Isabella looked at the man whose name made restaurant owners lower their voices and city officials return calls after midnight. Then Mr. Castellano requested the wrong location. A linen runner slipped from someone's fingers. Adrian crossed the ballroom, his polished shoes striking the marble in slow, measured beats. Up close, he carried the clean scent of cedar and cold air. "People usually agree with me," he said. Isabella brushed a drop of champagne from her wrist. "People usually aren't responsible for keeping your brother's wedding off the floor." Behind Adrian, Luca Castellano laughed once, quickly covering it with a cough. Adrian's eyes did not leave Isabella's face. "You're the planner?" "The third one this month. The first 2 quit. I read their emails. And you still came." Isabella lifted the bent metal support from beneath the table and placed it in his hand. Its edge was cold and rough against his tailored cuff. "Your family has 300 guests, 2 rival seating charts, a bride who wants candlelight near silk drapes, and a groom who approved an outdoor ceremony without checking the sprinkler schedule. Someone had to." Adrian examined the warped bracket, then glanced at the restored tower. Around them, the crew waited in silence, hearing only the soft hiss of the ventilation and silverware being sorted in the adjoining dining room. "You're not afraid of losing this job," he said. Isabella picked up her clipboard. "I'm afraid of doing it badly." For the first time, something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, but the memory of one. He turned toward the hotel manager. "Move the tower 6 feet east." Then he looked back at Isabella. "From now on, every decision for Luca's wedding comes through me. That will slow everything down. Then work faster." He started to leave, but stopped beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth held beneath his wool coat. "You saved my brother's wedding before you were officially hired." His voice dropped, quiet enough for her alone. "I want to see what else you can save." Isabella watched him walk away beneath the chandeliers, unaware that Adrian had already made one private decision about the wedding planner. He would personally oversee every meeting she attended. By sunrise, the ballroom had transformed into a maze of blueprints, fabric swatches, floral samples, and scale models spread across a 30-foot walnut conference table inside the Castellano estate. Fresh espresso scented the room, mingling with polished leather and beeswax from the antique bookshelves lining the walls. Isabella Hayes stood at one end, sleeves rolled neatly to her elbows, sliding seating cards into new positions while assistants measured centerpiece heights with laser levels. Adrian Castellano entered without announcement. Conversations dissolved into silence, leaving only the quiet scratch of a pencil and the distant ticking of a grandfather clock. Isabella did not look up immediately. She finished aligning one final place card before speaking. "Good morning. You're 3 minutes early." Adrian stopped beside the table. "Most people say thank you when I make time for them. Most people don't have 500 guests arriving in 12 days. She handed him a floor plan marked with red ink. "I need approvals." Adrian skimmed the pages. "You've cut the imported ice sculpture. It melts too quickly under ballroom lighting. You canceled the gold-plated party favors. No guest remembers party favors. They remember whether dinner arrived hot." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You also rejected the fireworks." Isabella tapped a photograph clipped to the proposal. "Your brother asked for an elegant wedding, not a stadium concert. Half the guests are over 60. The explosions would drown out the string quartet. Around the room, assistants exchanged nervous glances. No one corrected Adrian Castellano. No one except the woman already replacing expensive extravagance with careful precision. Adrian placed the proposal down. Do you enjoy telling powerful people they're wrong? Isabella picked up a linen sample, rubbing the fabric between her fingers before answering. I enjoy giving clients the wedding they asked for instead of the wedding everyone else expects them to buy. Luca wandered into the room carrying 2 paper coffee cups. Please tell me she talked you out of the fireworks, he said with a grin. Sophia hated them. Adrian looked from his younger brother to Isabella. Luca offered 1 cup to Isabella first. She accepted with a quiet thanks before returning to her notes. Adrian noticed the exchange without saying a word. Throughout the morning, Isabella moved constantly, adjusting lighting angles, replacing oversized flower arrangements with lower designs that allowed families to see each other across the tables, directing decorators to remove unnecessary crystal arches. Every change saved money. Every change improved the room. Every change ignored the assumption that luxury meant excess. At noon, Adrian found her alone in the courtyard measuring the stone staircase where the wedding photographs would be taken. Warm sunlight reflected from the limestone walls. Lavender drifted through the air from trimmed garden beds while a fountain splashed. Steadily nearby, "You're reducing my budget by almost $500,000, Adrian said. Isabella never stopped measuring. I'm protecting your brother from wasting it. Do you know how many people would spend a lifetime hoping for a budget like this? She pulled the measuring tape back with a metallic snap. And that's exactly why it shouldn't be wasted trying to impress people who'll forget the decorations before they reach the valet stand. Adrian studied her face for a long moment. There was no hesitation, no performance. She spoke to him exactly as she spoke to electricians, florists, and hotel managers. The difference was that everyone else tried to please him first. Isabella tried to protect the wedding first. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and placed a black access card on the stone railing between them. Effective immediately, he said, this card opens every Castellano property involved in the wedding. You'll have unrestricted authority over every vendor, every schedule, and every decision. Anyone who ignores your instructions answers directly to me. Isabella looked at the card, then back at Adrian. Neither of them noticed that the distance between employer and planner had just changed forever. Edit for the next 8 days. Isabella's schedule erased the difference between sunrise and midnight. Delivery trucks rolled through the estate gates before dawn, their diesel engines rumbling across the gravel drive, while forklifts carried crates of imported china into the reception hall. The scent of fresh-cut eucalyptus drifted through open loading doors, mixing with coffee and sawdust as carpenters reshaped the dance floor exactly 2 inches to match Isabella's revised blueprint. Adrian was there for every inspection. Sometimes he arrived in a tailored suit straight from a meeting downtown. Sometimes without a tie, sleeves folded neatly, reviewing invoices beneath warm pendant lights while the staff quietly pretended not to notice the city's most powerful man discussing table linens. Isabella noticed only because he never missed a meeting he had no reason to attend. The aisle is too narrow, she said one afternoon, walking between 2 rows of white oak chairs. Widen it by 18 inches. The rental supervisor hesitated. We've already finished the installation. Isabella picked up 1 chair herself, its wooden legs scraping softly across the polished floor. Then we'll finish it twice. Without a word, Adrian bent down beside her, lifted the entire front row, and carried it several feet back. Every worker immediately joined in. Within 10 minutes, the entire ceremony layout had changed. No orders had been shouted. No threats had been made. They simply followed the example standing in front of them. Isabella glanced toward Adrian. You didn't have to do that. He dusted a sleeve with the back of his hand. Neither did you. The following evening, they met at the family vineyard where Luca wanted photographs before the ceremony. Golden light settled across endless rows of grapevines while dry leaves rustled under their shoes. Isabella crouched near an old stone wall, adjusting the angle of several lanterns. The photographer will shoot from there, she said, pointing toward the hill. If the sun drops another 15 minutes, Luca and Sophia won't be staring into the light. Adrian stood quietly beside her, watching workers reposition antique barrels. You think about details nobody else notices. Isabella secured another lantern onto its hook. Details are what guests remember without realizing it. A groundskeeper approached carrying a ladder that wobbled with every step. Before the man could climb, Isabella steadied the base herself until he finished hanging the final lantern. She thanked him by name. The older man smiled beneath his weathered cap before driving away in a utility cart. Adrian remained silent long after the engine disappeared. "You know everyone's name," he finally said. Isabella brushed dust from her palms. People work differently when they know they matter. Adrian looked across the vineyard where dozens of employees continued preparing for his brother's wedding. One by one, workers greeted Isabella as they passed. She answered every greeting, every question, every concern without checking the time. No raised voice. No unnecessary command. Just calm direction that somehow moved an army faster than fear ever could. As darkness settled over the vines and string lights flickered on above the tasting terrace, Luca arrived to review the evening's progress. He laughed as Isabella corrected the height of a floral arch by less than an inch. "You're going to make this the best day of my life," he said. "That's the plan," Isabella answered with a small smile. Adrian watched the exchange from several feet away. His brother's easy confidence, Isabella's quiet certainty, the laughter echoing beneath glowing lights. None of it belonged to the cold, calculated world he normally ruled. When Luca walked toward the house to take a phone call, Adrian remained where he was. The warm bulbs reflected softly in his dark eyes as he faced Isabella. "Cancel tomorrow's vendor meeting," he said. She closed her leather portfolio. "Why?" "Because tomorrow," Adrian replied. "You're spending the entire day with me. We need to choose the wedding venue's final details together, and I don't want anyone else there. : Edit the next morning, Adrian's black sedan rolled through the iron gates of the lakeside estate, just as the first delivery vans pulled away. Frost still clung to the stone balustrades, and the crisp air carried the scent of pine and freshly brewed coffee drifting from the temporary catering tent. Isabella stepped out with a leather portfolio tucked beneath her arm and immediately began walking the property, measuring sightlines with nothing more than her eyes. Adrian matched her pace without speaking. They crossed the garden paths, inspected the waterfront terrace, and climbed the broad limestone staircase leading to the mansion's west balcony. Every few minutes Isabella stopped to move something herself. A bronze planter by 8 inches, a vintage bench several feet toward the water, a lantern just high enough to keep guests from blocking the photographer's frame. Adrian watched her hands more than the objects she moved. By noon they had reviewed every corner of the estate together. "Lunch," Adrian said. "We're not finished," Isabella replied without looking up from her notes. "Exactly." He gestured toward a small greenhouse overlooking the vineyard where a chef had quietly prepared a simple meal instead of the elaborate spread usually expected for the Castellano family. Warm sunlight filtered through the glass ceiling, catching tiny drops of water on hanging orchids. Fresh basil, baked bread, and roasted tomatoes filled the air. Isabella paused. "You canceled the formal dining room?" Adrian unfolded a chair for her. "You said guests remember comfort more than luxury." She gave him a curious glance before sitting down. "You're starting to listen. I'm starting to understand." The meal lasted barely 30 minutes, interrupted twice by calls Adrian ignored. His phone vibrated against the wooden table, its screen flashing names that would normally command his immediate attention. He silenced it each time without explanation. Isabella noticed, but returned to sketching adjustments on the seating diagram between bites. "You work during lunch?" Adrian asked. "Ideas don't wait until dessert." He looked at the rough pencil marks spreading across the page. "Neither do you." After lunch, they returned to the ballroom, where installers struggled to suspend hundreds of crystal pendants above the dance floor. One section hung unevenly, tilting almost imperceptibly toward the stage. The crew insisted no guest would ever notice. Isabella climbed the scaffold herself before anyone could object. Her fingertips traced the cold steel support while the crystals chimed softly around her. "Lower this side by 2 inches, she called down. "It's perfectly level," the foreman argued. Isabella removed one pendant from the highest row and held it against the light streaming through the windows. Tiny reflections scattered across the polished floor. "Now it's not symmetrical." Adrian climbed halfway up the scaffold beside her, steadying the platform while technicians adjusted the cables again. Minutes later, the chandeliers settled into perfect alignment. Every crystal reflected evenly. Even the skeptical foreman slowly nodded. "How did you see that?" Adrian asked quietly. Isabella smiled without triumph. "Because people don't remember perfection. They notice when something almost feels right." As evening settled over the estate, warm amber lights illuminated the ballroom exactly as she had envisioned. Luca arrived with Sophia to review the finished space. Sophia clasped her hands together, smiling at every carefully considered detail. Luca turned toward Adrian with an amused grin. "I don't know whether you're supervising the wedding anymore or just looking for excuses to spend time with Isabella." The room fell silent except for the soft notes of a violinist rehearsing near the stage. Isabella lowered her clipboard but said nothing. Adrian's eyes remained on the glowing dance floor for several long seconds before answering. "Tomorrow," he said calmly, "I'll handle the meetings alone." He turned toward Isabella. "You and I have already spent enough time together for people to start asking the wrong questions." The following morning, the estate moved with the quiet precision of a theater minutes before opening night. Steam curled from silver coffee urns in the service hall, forklifts hummed beyond the loading dock, and the faint scent of white roses drifted through corridors where florists trimmed stems into crystal vases. Isabella arrived carrying 3 garment bags and a portfolio thick with final schedules. Adrian was nowhere in sight. For the first time since taking the contract, every decision rested entirely in her hands. She did not hesitate. Within an hour, she reassigned the reception entrance, redirected the valet route to prevent traffic from backing onto the main drive, and replaced an oversized floral installation with a lower arrangement that opened the lake view exactly as Luca had imagined. When a decorator protested that Adrian had originally approved the larger display, Isabella simply folded the blueprint closed. "Today I'm responsible for this wedding," she said. "If something fails, my name fails with it." The workers exchanged quick glances before following her instructions. By early afternoon, the ballroom breathed differently. Natural light poured through the windows without obstruction. The aisle appeared longer, and every table seemed connected instead of isolated. Luca walked slowly across the room, stopping near the center of the dance floor. He turned in a slow circle, listening to the string quartet rehearse while sunlight reflected softly from hundreds of suspended crystals overhead. "This finally feels like us," he said quietly to Isabella. "Not like a business event." She adjusted the angle of a single chair by less than an inch. "That's what weddings are supposed to feel like." The sound of polished shoes echoed across the marble entrance. Adrian stepped inside, removing his leather gloves as he surveyed the ballroom in complete silence. Several vendors instinctively straightened their posture. Isabella continued reviewing the lighting schedule without walking toward him. Adrian crossed the room alone. His eyes moved from the open terrace to the simplified floral displays, then to the expanded dance floor and the unobstructed view of the lake beyond the glass walls. Nothing resembled the extravagant plan he had approved weeks earlier. Everything looked better. "You changed almost every major design," he said. Isabella handed him the revised schedule. "I changed everything that distracted from your brother." Adrian turned one page after another. There were fewer decorations, fewer unnecessary displays, fewer expensive distractions. Every revision placed Luca and Sophia at the center instead of the wealth surrounding them. He closed the folder. "You ignored my instructions. I protected your brother's wedding." Their voices remained calm, but every conversation nearby faded into silence. Even the violin rehearsal stopped. Adrian walked past Isabella and stood at the center of the ballroom, looking toward the ceremony aisle exactly as the guests would. Warm afternoon light reached the front rows without striking anyone directly in the eyes. The breeze carried the scent of fresh greenery through the open terrace doors. He remained there for several long seconds before speaking without turning around. "Everyone else tried to impress me." He slowly faced Isabella. "You impressed the only person who mattered." Luca laughed softly from across the room. "That's because she listened to me instead of you." Adrian answered with the slightest nod before looking back at Isabella. "Keep every change." Relief never appeared on her face. She simply opened another folder and continued issuing instructions to the production crew. As evening settled over the estate, workers dismantled the last unnecessary decorations while musicians rehearsed beneath warm amber lights. Adrian watched Isabella directing dozens of people with nothing but quiet confidence and precise timing. He realized he had spent the entire day searching every room for one person instead of checking on the wedding itself. Long after everyone else had left, he remained alone in the empty ballroom. The crystal pendants reflected across the polished floor as he stared at the aisle she had redesigned for his brother. Then, in the silence, he made a decision no one else in the family knew yet. From that moment forward, he would no longer allow himself to be alone with Isabella unless the wedding absolutely required it. At the estate felt strangely larger the next morning. The marble corridors echoed with rolling equipment cases, florist carts, and the muffled rhythm of hammers finishing the outdoor ceremony platform. Yet Adrian was nowhere Isabella expected him to be. Every meeting she entered already contained his written approval. Every schedule adjustment had been signed before dawn. His assistants delivered instructions without inviting conversation. The black access card he had given her still unlocked every door, but the man who had insisted on attending every inspection had disappeared behind closed office doors. Isabella paused outside the ballroom, hearing the distant swell of a string quartet rehearsing while cool air drifted through the open terrace. She glanced once toward Adrian's study before returning to work. Inside the reception hall, a shipment of ivory candles had arrived in the wrong size. Without hesitation, she redirected the installation, replacing tall centerpieces with clusters of smaller glass hurricanes that reflected the afternoon light across the polished tables. Workers immediately rearranged the room around her new design. The atmosphere softened. The ballroom no longer felt intimidating. It felt welcoming. Late that afternoon, Adrian entered only long enough to review the updated floor plan. Fresh espresso lingered in the room from an untouched cup someone had left beside him. He studied the drawings without lifting his eyes toward Isabella. "Everything on schedule?" he asked. 2 hours ahead." "Good. Would you like to see the rehearsal layout?" He closed the folder. "If you approved it, I don't need to." The conversation ended before it had truly begun. Adrian turned and walked away, his footsteps fading down the marble corridor. Isabella remained standing with the blueprint still open in her hands. One of the decorators quietly approached. "He trusts you more than anyone we've ever seen." Isabella folded the plans together with careful precision. Trust doesn't require conversation. She returned to directing the rehearsal, assigning ushers, repositioning musicians, and correcting the spacing between ceremony chairs until every row aligned perfectly with the aisle. Evening settled across the lakeside estate in warm amber tones. Lanterns flickered along the stone pathways while the scent of cedar smoke drifted from outdoor fire bowls waiting for wedding guests. Luca arrived for the final rehearsal carrying his tuxedo jacket over one shoulder. He stopped beside Adrian, who stood near the back of the ceremony site instead of walking to the front as he normally would. "You've barely spoken to her all day," Luca said quietly. Adrian kept his eyes on the empty aisle. "That's intentional. Because people started talking?" Adrian answered only after a long silence broken by the rustling leaves overhead. "Because this wedding isn't about me." Across the lawn, Isabella adjusted the ribbon marking Sophia's entrance position, then stepped backward to judge the symmetry from 50 feet away. She never looked toward Adrian. Not once. The rehearsal unfolded flawlessly. Bridesmaids reached every mark on time. Musicians followed Isabella's subtle hand signals. Sunset painted the lake in shades of gold and copper as the final walkthrough ended without a single correction from Adrian. Everyone congratulated Isabella before heading inside for dinner. She gathered her folders alone, stacking color samples and schedules into neat piles. As she reached for the last binder, Adrian appeared beside the aisle. The cool evening breeze stirred the edges of the seating chart between them. "The wedding is ready," he said. "It is. Then tomorrow, after the ceremony begins, your job here will be finished." Isabella nodded once, slipped the binder beneath her arm, and answered with quiet professionalism. "Then tomorrow I'll leave your family's world exactly the way I found it." Adrian watched her walk toward the mansion without calling her back, knowing those simple words suddenly felt far more final than either of them had expected. Trian dang ko, emotidm lekt so voi swan widathong nod. Okak fan truok, twin, mu sat, va q luka, chua duok ze dong. Trong Kai Fan 6 de Ket Tuk Bang Vik Isabella Chuan by Roy D. Sao Dam Koi. Nu Teep Tuc Theo Dung Mok, Du Tse Kong the Dan, Tu Nin Din Chao Treo Va Loi Hua Kwa Tu Da. Theo Yu Ka Kwa Ban. Kai Ko Sung Da Ti Phi Yu Tien Tu Da Va Swan Y. Dong Loi Tu Ju Chin Da Dua Ka Chien Tiaro Lai Dung Hong. Vive. O Fan 7 Kan Chuyen Hung Sang Bukengoat Keen Adrian Nan Ra On Kong the Chi Koi Isabella La Wedding Planner. In Hung Van Tran Dua Mot. Twin Mu Mwachiem Trong Tom. Edit Wedding morning arrived with the soft ringing of chapel bells drifting across the lake as the first guests stepped onto the limestone paths in polished shoes. Fresh white roses filled the entrance with a clean floral fragrance, and sunlight spilled through the tall glass walls, scattering warm reflections across the marble floor Isabella had spent 2 relentless weeks perfecting. Every ribbon hung exactly where she had measured it. Every chair faced the ceremony aisle at the precise angle she had adjusted herself. Staff members moved with quiet confidence, following schedules clipped neatly to their tablets. Isabella crossed the estate one final time, smoothing a linen runner with her fingertips, straightening a place card by less than an inch, thanking each vendor before sending them to their stations. She carried no trace of celebration, only the calm rhythm of someone finishing the work she had promised to complete. Adrian watched from the upper balcony. He had spent the entire morning avoiding her, yet his eyes searched for her every time she disappeared behind a doorway. Below him, she paused beside an elderly florist struggling to lift a heavy arrangement. Before any security guard reacted, Isabella set down her portfolio, removed her jacket, and helped carry the flowers herself across the stone terrace. Her sleeves caught a dusting of pollen. She smiled at the woman, brushed the petals from the arrangement, and quietly returned to work before anyone applauded. Adrian remained motionless. The violin quartet began tuning inside the ballroom, each clear note echoing through the vaulted ceiling while guests filled the reception area with low conversations and the soft clink of crystal glasses. Luca emerged from the dressing suite wearing his tuxedo, adjusting one cuff as he searched for his brother. "Everything's ready," he said, glancing toward the gardens. "She made sure of it." Adrian nodded without answering. Luca followed his gaze until he found Isabella reviewing the ceremony in trance one final time. "You've been looking at her instead of the wedding all week," Luca said with a quiet laugh. Adrian looked away. "Today is your day." "Exactly." Luca rested a hand on his brother's shoulder. "Which is why you should stop pretending you're standing here because of me." Adrian said nothing. The silence between them lasted longer than the music drifting from the ballroom. A wedding coordinator hurried over with unexpected news. Heavy traffic had delayed several relatives, and the ceremony would have to begin 15 minutes later unless the entire schedule changed. Before anyone could panic, Isabella stepped into the center of the courtyard. She reassigned musicians, redirected photographers, moved cocktail service to the shaded terrace, and adjusted every vendor's timeline within minutes. Guests barely noticed anything had changed. The delay disappeared into the flow of the morning as though it had always been part of the plan. Adrian watched every decision unfold without a single raised voice. Nothing about her authority came from power. It came from trust. As the church bells rang again, Luca buttoned his jacket and turned toward his brother with an expression Adrian had never seen before. "You hired the right woman to plan my wedding," he said quietly. "But I don't think that's the only reason you're afraid to look at her." Adrian's jaw tightened, yet he offered no denial. Instead, he crossed the courtyard himself, stopping only a few feet from Isabella as she finished adjusting the bride's entrance ribbon. She looked up, expecting another logistical question. Instead, Adrian held her portfolio before she could reach for it. Their hands met only for a heartbeat against the worn leather cover. "After the ceremony," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, "don't leave until you've spoken with me." Edit the ceremony began exactly as Isabella had designed it. The first notes of the string quartet floated across the lake, blending with the gentle splash of the fountain and the rustle of silk dresses as hundreds of guests rose from their seats. Sunlight poured through the white floral arch, catching the crystal pendants suspended above the aisle and scattering soft reflections over polished stone. Luca waited at the front beside the officiant, his shoulders finally relaxed. Sophia stepped into view, her gown moving like flowing ivory across the marble path. Isabella stood discreetly behind the last row, one hand resting on the leather portfolio that had guided every minute of the past 2 weeks. She spoke only through small gestures now. A nod to the musicians. A raised finger to delay the flower girls by 2 seconds. A quiet wave to the photographer just before Sophia reached the center of the aisle. Everything unfolded with effortless precision because every difficult decision had already been made long before this morning. Adrian remained near the side of the ceremony instead of taking the place of honor everyone expected. His eyes should have followed the bride. Instead, they found Isabella again and again as she quietly solved problems before anyone else noticed them. A young ring bearer froze halfway down the aisle, clutching the velvet pillow with trembling hands. Before panic could spread through the guests, Isabella stepped forward from the side, crouched to the boy's height, straightened his tiny jacket, whispered something only he could hear, then gently turned him back toward Luca. The child smiled and continued walking. The audience never realized anything had almost gone wrong. Adrian did. Every person present celebrated the wedding. Only one person protected it. Moments later, Luca and Sophia exchanged their vows beneath the floral arch Isabella had insisted be lowered to frame the lake instead of hiding it. Warm applause rolled across the estate as they were pronounced husband and wife. Crystal glasses chimed during the reception while laughter echoed beneath the ballroom chandeliers. Servers carried dinner through the room exactly on schedule. Musicians shifted seamlessly into the evening program, and guests repeatedly praised details they assumed had happened naturally. Isabella accepted every compliment with the same quiet smile before moving on to the next task. Near sunset, Luca finally slipped away from the celebration and found Adrian standing alone on the terrace overlooking the vineyard. Cool evening air carried the scent of cedar and fresh grass, while golden light stretched across the hills. Luca removed his bow tie and laughed softly. "You know what the best gift I received today was?" Adrian looked toward the reception hall. "Marrying Sophia?" "That too." Luca leaned against the stone railing. "But the real gift was watching someone care more about our happiness than about being noticed." Adrian remained silent. Luca followed his brother's gaze toward the ballroom entrance where Isabella was thanking the catering staff before helping them carry empty serving trays back inside despite wearing the same elegant suit she had worked in since dawn. "She never once acted like this was her success," Lucas said. "She made it ours." Adrian lowered his eyes for only a moment. Lucas smiled knowingly. "You hired her to build my wedding. Somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing a wedding planner." Adrian gave no reply because none was necessary. The silence answered first. Luca placed a hand on his brother's shoulder one final time before returning toward the reception. "If you walk away now," he said, "without turning back, you won't lose a planner. You'll lose the woman you've been trying not to love." Adrian stood motionless until the music from inside swelled into another round of applause. Then he made his choice. Instead of returning to the head table beside his family, he walked through the ballroom, past every guest, and stopped directly in front of Isabella as she gathered the last of her schedules into the worn leather portfolio. Every conversation around them slowly faded. Adrian looked into her eyes and spoke with calm certainty. "When this reception ends, I'm asking you to stay because there is something I should have told you long before today. : Edit the reception stretched late into the evening beneath a ceiling of crystal lights that shimmered like quiet stars above the dance floor Isabella had imagined long before the first guest arrived. Soft jazz drifted through the ballroom, blending with gentle laughter, the clink of champagne flutes, and the warm scent of cedar from the fireplaces overlooking the lake. One by one, vendors packed away equipment. Florists collected empty crates. Photographers captured their final portraits before disappearing into the night. Isabella checked the last item on her schedule, closed the worn leather portfolio that had rarely left her hands for 2 weeks, and slipped the black access card Adrian had given her into its front pocket. Her work was finished. She quietly thanked the remaining staff, shook hands with the hotel manager, and walked toward the grand entrance without looking back. Before she reached the doors, Adrian's voice stopped her. "Don't leave yet." She turned slowly. The ballroom behind him had grown quieter as guests drifted toward the terrace to watch the final dance beneath strings of glowing lights. Adrian crossed the polished floor alone. No security at his side, no assistants carrying schedules, No distance left between the man everyone feared and the woman who had never treated him differently from anyone else. He held out the black access card she had forgotten on the registration table moments earlier. You left this behind. Isabella accepted it with a faint smile. I won't need it anymore. Adrian looked at the card resting between their hands for a long moment before gently closing her fingers around it. That's where you're wrong. Outside, the music softened as the newlyweds shared another dance on the terrace overlooking the lake. Warm evening air drifted through the open doors carrying the scent of roses and fresh grass. Luca stepped inside just long enough to find the two of them standing in the quiet ballroom. He glanced from Adrian to Isabella, then smiled with unmistakable understanding. Sophia and I owe you the most beautiful day of our lives, he said to Isabella. You gave us exactly the wedding we dreamed about. Isabella inclined her head politely. You gave each other the rest. Luca laughed softly before looking at his brother. Now stop pretending this conversation is still about my wedding. He squeezed Adrian's shoulder once and walked back outside, closing the terrace doors behind him. Silence settled over the ballroom. The chandeliers reflected across the marble floor where workers had already cleared the tables, leaving only the aisle Isabella had carefully redesigned. Adrian slowly walked toward its center. When I hired you, he said, his voice carrying gently through the empty room, I believed I was choosing the best planner in the city for my brother. Isabella listened without interrupting. Then every meeting became the part of my day I looked forward to. Every problem seemed smaller after you solved it. Every room felt different after you walked into it. He stopped only a few feet away. I kept telling myself that when the wedding ended, everything would return to normal. Isabella lowered her eyes briefly to the closed portfolio in her hands before meeting his gaze again. It can. Adrian gave a quiet shake of his head. I don't want it to. From the inside pocket of his jacket, he removed a small velvet box. He did not kneel immediately. Instead, he placed the box on the edge of the first ceremony chair, the same chair Isabella had personally moved by less than an inch on the first day they met. This isn't a reward for your work, he said. And it isn't an impulsive decision after an emotional day. He opened the box. A simple diamond caught the warm chandelier light without excess or spectacle, elegant in exactly the way Isabella had taught him elegance should be. You planned my brother's wedding with more care than most people give their own lives. Somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't counting the days until the ceremony. I was counting the moments until I saw you again. Isabella stood perfectly still. Then she set the portfolio on the nearest chair, reached out with steady hands, and closed the velvet box before he could say another word. Adrian's expression barely changed. She smiled for the first time without the careful professionalism that had separated them from the beginning. Then she gently took the ring from the box herself and placed it into his hand. You forgot one step, she whispered. Adrian's breath caught in the quiet room. What step? Isabella looked directly into his eyes. You never actually asked me. A laugh escaped him before he could stop it, warm and genuine enough to echo beneath the chandeliers. He took both of her hands. Isabella Hayes, will you marry me? She answered by slipping the ring onto her finger before saying the single word he had hoped to hear. Outside, Luca and Sophia's celebration continued exactly as Isabella had promised it would, while inside the empty ballroom, the man who had hired her to create his brother's perfect wedding finally found the courage to ask for a future of his own. And for the first time in Adrian Castellano's life, the greatest celebration he ever witnessed was not the one he paid for, but the one love quietly planned for him. :